Hi, this is a meeting about audit management. I'm Sid, co-founder CEO at GitLab. Maybe it's good to do a quick introduction of everyone in this call. Emily, you want to go first?
My name is Emily Sherio. I'm an internal strategy consultant at GitLab. Kyla?
Thanks, Emily. I'm Kylie Grudine, and I am in the second week of the CEO Shadow program. When I'm not in the CEO Shadow program, I am on the sales side at GitLab as a mid-market account executive. Clement?
Hi, my name is Clement. Also the CEO Shadow. This is my first week, and normally I am the front-end engineering manager for the Monitor Health team.
Can everyone hand it over to the next person that hasn't been? And the last person hands it back to me.
I can go next. Hi, my name is Eric Brinkman. I'm a director of product here responsible for our dev section. Jeremy?
Hey, I'm Jeremy Watson. I'm a product manager here at GitLab, primarily responsible for the managed stage of the DevOps lifecycle. Matt, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Jeremy. I'm Matt Gonzalez. I'm a product manager for the managed stage as well, specifically the compliance group. Who else is on here? I think I'm the last one.
Cool. So the reason for this call is that I've had a couple of meetings with big customers, and 80% of them are having a lot of questions about compliance. Most of them have to comply with financial or other regulations, and they're building all kinds of their own tooling to do that, to achieve that with GitLab. And I think this is something which GitLab should do for them. So that's why suddenly this has quickly become a lot more important than it was. And we've seen with security that customers had existing solutions, but as soon as we introduced something, it was so much better because it was so much easier to deploy. They had the existing tooling, but it affected less than 10% of their projects got checked. And I think here we have the same thing where those custom solutions they're making, it's super hard to get them deployed. If we do it right in GitLab, that's a big help, and it's something that is like a big problem for them. Like they need it solved urgently, and there's there's budget for that. There's a video that got recorded, a conversation between me and Matt, and I think Dan McBride chimed in a bit when we were in Vegas. I don't see that recording, Kyla. Maybe you can link that under point 3. There's a bit more detail in the doc. The only company that seems to do this really well is Xebia Labs. And what they where people want to get is I push a button, I have a report that I can show an external auditor. Let's see. And I made a proposal, and that's captured under 5 under Epic 2087. And I proposed hey, we should allow people to define frameworks, have policies under those frameworks, have overrides, and then link the frameworks to certain projects. And that got picked up. There were comments on that, but what I didn't see and what I hope to see in the future is more examples of what are the frameworks we're talking about, what are the policies that could be examples of this, and what are overrides that are logical considering it, so that we have a better view of all these things. And I've not seen that yet, and I was hoping for that, and I hope that we can do that. And then we need kind of a sequence. Okay, if this is a good idea, which is still a question mark, but if this is a good idea, what's our sequence in building it? Because you kind of want to have the plan is going to be useless, but the planning is going to be indispensable. We want to start off on the right end and the minimal end. So instead of immediately going, for example, to enforcement, my recommendation would be to not enforce anything, just show whether people are compliant first. And instead of having that report, let's start with showing that in the interface. So you start with, hey, in this group, which things are happening according to a policy? Then you allow people to publish that report. You allow them to link a framework to the policy. You allow them to link the framework to projects. Then you start doing the enforcement where you cannot merge a merge request unless it complies with the framework. And then you allow for overrides. I think this is like the only sequence I see that adds value at every step, and but that adds value at every step. But I'm open to suggestions. And then I also think I want to kind of signal that this is a big thing in GitLab, and right now it falls under, we have audit management on our homepage as a category, and that links to audit events, which is very different from audit reporting, because audit events are basically logs of like who did what at what time. They are not useful. They're not a useful basis for audit reporting. Maybe like if someone asks you, do you know who accessed the system? Yes, but it's not the start of policy. So maybe even to separate them, we can call if audit events, if the current category is just audit events, we can just name it audit events. And then maybe we should name the other things compliance reports and compliance enforcements. You gave those to an auditor. Now, in the business, that's called audit. Audit reports is something that people set naturally, but we have to think a bit about this naming. And then lastly, I looked at a bit of the current work, and I had some questions and concerns there, but that's less important. It's more important to me that we kind of get that we quickly have a vision of where we want to go with examples of frameworks, policies, and overrides, a sequence, and kind of wireframes so that it's easy for people to visualize this, because this has come up in every single, well, not every single, 80% of the meetings with large customers. So we need something to show those customers. And nothing works better than a wireframe, like, hey, this is where we're working towards, and where they can say, okay, this is what we need. And then we can also appropriately, and then we're going to see the real interest, and then we can appropriately staff the project, because if this is as big as I think it is, we should probably spend a lot more effort, a lot more effort here, and maybe have more people. But that's very far. First, let's figure these things out. So I'm open for criticism and questions and other things.
Sid, I overall agree with the sequencing that you articulated. I think that I don't have a strong opinion over whether we pursue policy reporting first or the specific project level framework first. But I think both of those are part of like the minimal, state of where we need to be in our first iteration, which is I should be able to run some type of report at the project level and or just at the project level to be able to understand the policies, the compliance state of a particular project. And I should also be able to establish a number of project level policies and have those be in a monitoring state where we are not enforcing on them. And any exceptions that would appear in my reporting.
Yeah.
And I think later on...
So Jeremy, just to split things up a bit, but so the reason to do a policy first and then later add the framework is that if you only have a framework, there's no reporting that you can do. You cannot say if it's compliant with a framework if you don't know what the policies are that fall under the framework. But you said it's still a question in your mind. That's how I see it. How do you see it? Is it possible to have a framework but no policies and have anything that's useful?
No. I think that when you say framework, what are you referring to when you use that term?
So a framework would be SOX 2, GDPR, etc. And under a framework, you define which policies. Like under SOX 2, I want to have every piece of code peer reviewed, for example.
I agree. The way that I've considered like a framework, and Matt, feel free to jump in on this since I think that you're one of the compliance experts in the room, is introducing individual policy controls that we can templatize and use as frameworks. So if I build up and I iterate on the number of policies that I'm able to offer in a particular project level, eventually I should be able to say, well, GitLab is going to maintain like a SOX 2 template that you can apply to a project. And instead of needing to roll your own policies and have your own definition of what SOX 2 compliance is, well, GitLab is going to maintain that, and you can just simply apply that to a project.
I think a template is a technical implementation, which I think is the wrong one. I don't think this should be version controlled. And we'll save that discussion. What is the generic name for like things like SOX 2 and GDPR? Maybe you know that.
When you say generic name, you mean what I guess an industry would refer to those as? I think frameworks would probably that.
Yeah, okay. So that's why I'm calling them frameworks.
Well, and just to echo Jeremy a little bit there, I think one of the biggest challenges is, first, I think our internal security compliance team made a good point, which is we have to be very careful about the language we use to describe compliance as it pertains to features we're building to enable that. So we can enable compliance efforts with our customers. And I think starting where Jeremy has proposed would allow us to test the waters there to see if what we're implementing, for example, at the merge request level, is it helpful to see these things at a snapshot in that merge request widget? Is it helpful to then see a report of those things in some aggregate view and then build from there with the narrative that as we deploy more features pertaining to compliance and compliance enablement, I guess we could phrase it, then in theory, day one, you're maybe 20% of the way towards framework A, which might be SOC 2. But in day or month 12, you're now 80% of the way there based on the features we've iterated on.
Okay, so in my proposal for the sequence, it's reporting first, enforcement second. And I think that's Web Application Firewall. We do the same thing. Almost anything you do, you want reporting first, enforcement second, because otherwise you don't know what happens when you turn on the enforcement, and that could be a big detriment. So, and both of you are referring to what we're currently doing. So let's go there for C. That's issue 7626. I think there's a couple of mistakes that we're making, and this is currently in progress. I assume it's 12.5. It's enforcement, not reporting. It is version controlled, which I think makes it much harder to roll this out. I'm not sure where these files live. I assume on the project level. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So that makes it very, very hard. Like the people making these files are not programmers, they're compliance people. They're used to working in the user interface. There's no requirement anywhere that these should be version controlled, that people want to use Git. In fact, they want to change the policies. They have on company level, they have policies that they want to implement for all the projects that fall under, well, at the company level, they have frameworks and they want to roll it out to everything that falls under that framework. And then that framework has policies. So imagine now if you want to change something, now you have to change the source code of 1,000 projects. That I don't think that's what customers are. That's what customers need. Now, most of our customers need. I'm sure this was made because some customer asked for this, but I don't think this is what the majority of our customers need.
I think it would be useful to have a trail of when those policies are changed, but we can do that as in terms of an audit log. We don't have to do it as version control.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point. Jeremy, if we kind of made a UI section for this, where do you think this would fall? This is at the project level, I think seems maybe too granular, based off of Sid's comments here, and I tend to agree with him. Compliance is typically at the organization level, but we've also talked about these being applied at the project level because different projects are going to have different levels of compliance. What are your thoughts?
I think the project level is still the way that I've been thinking about it because of the way that organizations think about compliance levels that are specific to different projects. I think that your point about configuration and management across many projects is a fair one. So I think that but I still feel like project level policies is the right way of thinking about it. And I do agree that disambiguating this from a version control solution and over a UI one that's tracked with audit events is definitely a better way of approaching it. But
so Jeremy, I want to understand. So you want policies on the project level instead of frameworks?
No, I would like. I mean, a framework has many policies in it, and those apply at the project level.
Yes, so we need frameworks on the project. Like we need to link frameworks to projects, not policies to projects.
Fair enough.
Okay.
So one of my thoughts around this is that, so the framework, let's just use SOC 2 as an example. The framework specifies common controls. SOC 2 in particular can be somewhat lax or laid back in those common control languages. So they might say, for example, we recently talked about password related expiration. SOC 2 defines it as, well, you have to have a password policy in place and you have to have these authorization measures in place, but it doesn't specify explicit details about how that's implemented. SOC 2 looks at it more broadly at the organization level of what do you say you're doing with respect to password management, show us how you're doing it, and prove that with some evidence artifacts. And so the framework SOC 2 then dictates what the organization writes for policy, and GitLab is now an extension of the organization, and so they're trying to transfer their internal policy to the projects or the group level, but in this case, projects. So yes, the projects may have policies that are based on framework, but ultimately it's still the organization's interpretation of at least SOC 2. PCI leaves a little less room to wiggle.
Yes, it's not our interpretation, it's the organization's interpretation. I think that interpretation should happen at the group level. So at the group level, you link frameworks to policies, and GitLab will do something out of the box. You can remove things and you can add things as you see fit.
Yeah, I think I do agree with that. I think Jeremy and I spoke about being able to provide some sort of standard, I'm going to use the word template, but if we map some features or functionality to, let's say, Common Control 1 in SOC 2, that maybe manifests as a feature within GitLab that does X, Y, and Z things. Initially reporting, down the road, maybe some level of enforcement. But does that sound aligned with what you're thinking?
It's hard to get the lingo right. This is abstract. That's the reason we haven't gotten this right yet. But I think for the framework linked to policies, we should set defaults. So when you like, there's a list of frameworks, you can add your own name at some point. Like, I want to add a custom framework, but by default, they will come with like GDPR, SOC 2, and HIPAA, for example. And they will have policies below them. And you can add and remove policies at the group level as a customer. It won't be a template, because a template implies version control, and that's what we're not going to do. As my proposal, I'm just arguing for a proposal. And then the policies itself should not be programmable. So what we're seeing now, where you kind of program the policy, I think that's a dead end. I think the policies should be stuff inside GitLab, and this might be very complex programming rules. And they might be customizable, like don't deploy around the holidays. Great. So for many companies, it's like everything that was used in our selling to the consumer, everything in our consumer infrastructure can deploy during the holidays. So what they do is they have a framework called consumer infrastructure. They have a policy, don't deploy. And they can add, like, when the holiday is, we cannot say that. So they can add the dates and the times to that. But the policy itself of like not deploying or everything peer reviewed, etc. Those are things we pre-bake in. If they want something extra, they add it to GitLab for everyone.
Sid, how do you see reporting connected to frameworks? So the way that Matt and I have been thinking about it is if we're able to set a framework at the group level, there was like a previous issue that we talked about.
Frameworks are linked to projects.
Okay, that was my misinterpretation. I thought I heard something different earlier. The change dashboard issue that like was created a few months back. I've seen that in my mind as being at the group level. And how do you kind of see reporting fitting in with like a framework for compliance?
Can we look at that? The thing you're talking about?
Sure, pulling it up right now. Let me drop that into the agenda. I just added that to 5E and reporting.
So, okay, this isn't shipped yet, the change dashboard.
No, it's not shipped yet, but it's planned for the near future. And so my question is, would you mind talking a little bit about reporting as related to a framework?
Yeah, so I'm gonna make it easy for myself here. So I changed the sequence on the 5B. First, we have a policy report in the group for master. So I could see there's a policy. Let's, for example, say every change needs to be peer reviewed. And I think my green screen is messing up, so I'll turn that off. Everything needs to be peer reviewed. And I can, on the group level, I go to, someone under wireframes, please take note. On the group level, I go to, what do we call it? Compliance reports. And there's only one policy, so it's easy. I just see of all the projects, the latest changes in master, did it have someone else merge the code? Then who wrote the code? Did someone merge it who didn't wrote a single piece of code? And it will give kind of a green or red thing. That will be the initial version. And then step 2, under 5B2, I can click on a project and I can see the history. And that's the change dashboard. Step 3 is I can report from the group. Maybe we'll move that up because it's even easier. So let's move that up.
Cool, that's helpful.
Is there a step between 2B5 and 2B6 where there's framework reporting? So we go basically from framework edit to project straight into enforcement?
So
I think there would be, because you're gonna want to understand what percentage of that framework is actually covered by a policy.
So this is between 5 and 6, between these two?
Where Emily is typing right now, yes.
Yeah, and the next one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you can add the framework to projects and say, hey, this project has to be SOX 2 compliant. And from then on, all the policies under SOX 2, you can see a report whether it's compliant or not. That doesn't mean you can't merge the merge request. That's the next step. That's a separate step.
Yeah, I guess I took took 5 as a literal, hey, you now have the ability to attach a framework to a project.
Yeah, that is what it is.
Okay, so it's not necessarily doing reporting. So I don't want
The reporting
to be
you already
implicit.
the reporting you already have under policy dashboard. Maybe that's clear.
Isn't the first 3 all reporting?
I
So
think
for me, the difference between dashboard and reporting is a dashboard is a view in the UI, and a report is something that is a PDF. But let's change report to PDF to make it super clear.
If I'm
I would love to.
Sorry, Eric. If I'm understanding correctly, the distinction is whether we're showing a policy reporting or a framework reporting. Am I correct, Eric?
Yeah, whereas the framework reporting would say, a policy report to me, please disagree or chime in, is I'm going to dump an Excel file.
Can you no longer use reporting? Can you use dashboard or PDF?
PDF. I would actually call it more of like a CSV, because if you look at like the ZB Labs
CSV
report, like they're dumping out a CSV into Excel.
Totally works.
But yeah, either way. Whereas like, so you're just going to get a raw dump of all of your policies into a CSV that you're going to be able to look at in Excel. That might span multiple groups, might span tons of frameworks. But if you are necessarily, like if you're going through an audit, then I think you actually care about one specific framework and looking at it from a holistic point of view, from all the requirements, like, you know, Matt linked the PCI DSS template in an issue earlier.
Sure.
I think it would be great to have framework reporting, and that's what I mean by that. And unfortunately, I need to drop to go get a kid real quick. But I'll follow up on the second half of the combo later.
Allows, yeah. So I think it's the view under 4. So it would the framework thing would allow you to view it like that.
Okay, cool. That'll work. I just want to make sure we call it out. Appreciate it. See y'all.
Cool. Cool. Are we there of like changing what we are working on in let's see, sorry, the policy thing. So 7626 and changing it to this, or is that too early? So to recap, I think 7626 is the wrong road, because we shouldn't be version controlling stuff. That makes it harder to do stuff in the interface, and these people want to use a UI. It leads to an interface full of warnings, which is not the right way to proceed. I want to say I'm positively impressed with the iteration here. I wasn't thinking that we were already making something, so kudos for that. We should favor pre-made policies over programming. We should do the work of figuring out these policies, not the customer. And we need to link to the framework, not the policy. So projects should have a framework that applies to them. The framework has policies, but projects shouldn't have policies. If they have a one-off policy, they will need to create a one-off framework for that. So Emily, like, yes, everything's a legal risk. Everything should come with disclaimers that the software cannot automate your compliance. And there's more nuance to it, because we need to be compliant as a tool itself. Otherwise, people need to check the tool. So that will be the case for the foreseeable future, etc. But let's first figure out what to make, and then how to stay compliant while making it.
Thank you.
So that's what I think is wrong with 7626. So I'm proposing that we scrap that and start doing something else. But it's been 2 years since I ever tried to stop something that was in progress in the sprint. So it's a big thing. It's a big decision. I wonder
Hey,
how everyone feels.
Sid, I'd like to recap it real quick, just to make sure I have the solid understanding. So what you're envisioning for kind of the end result here is that our customers will be able to in some way specify the framework or set of frameworks that they're trying to adhere to. Within a group, they can set the policy or several policies that then dictate behavior within each of the projects to help them adhere to that framework. And then they'll have a dashboard at the group level that then shows them an aggregate view of how compliant they are across those projects. And then also have an ability to generate a CSV output of some sort that is the evidence artifacts towards the audit in some way.
Couldn't have put it any better.
Okay, that's very clear. Thank you.
Sid, where do you, so part of that reporting that gets generated to me is like a list of exceptions or problems. Where in this sequence do you see like the exceptions kind of being reported on and are listed?
From 5B1.
Cool. I totally agree. And how do you, Matt and I were kind of discussing how people respond to those exceptions. So I think the natural thing to do is like when you run a report, you make a user aware of all the problems that were recently merged. Like 2 weeks ago, a merge request went to master that wasn't peer reviewed correctly. They need to take some corrective action. To me, I see that, coming near the tail end of like either between enforcement and overrides and or after overrides. But I'm curious to think, how do people like handle those exceptions, and where does that kind of fit into the sequence?
So handling those exceptions, I think it's, for now, we got enough to do before we worry about that. So I will put it after overrides.
Cool. Agreed.
Exception management. So we also should at some point show the reasons for exceptions. Like, was it an override? Did it drift out of policy? For example, due to a dependency vulnerability find. Is it a new policy? Is it a new framework on the project? But that's very far from today.
Totally agree. Sid, do you mind talking a little bit more about why you feel like audit management should be decomposed into audit events and audit reports?
Well, there's I want most of the stages on our homepage to have seven or eight categories. I also think the homepage should reflect how important something is. And it's funny, today it's called audit management, and you click it and it goes to audit events. And it kind of tells us that the naming is off. And I think in the end, it's nice that we have these logs and they're used for auditing, but they're not used for auditing in the sense that auditors do. Auditors have a different view. They don't say, show me the log files. They say, hey, show me the latest change to production and now show me that it's compliant, which is a very different view. So I think in the current audit management, we try to capture both views, and I think it's a recipe for confusion.
I can see that. My initial response thinking was that it's just a bad link and we should update to our strategy page for the category as opposed to audit events. But I can see how the user is very different for both of these. And the vision for the category is also different. So I can see where you're coming from. Can we talk more about the items under number 4? So I think we've covered most of the agenda.
Cool. If
But I'd
we
love to
can,
hear more about that.
yeah, if we can close this out, Matt, what are you thinking about how to proceed?
I mean, I like the sequence that's been proposed. I like the recap that we've agreed on, and I think that we'll now need to take it back and figure out where do we go from here, given the context of wanting to create the multiple categories, wanting to figure out how to map a framework to a customer's policies, and then enabling that type of compliance within GitLab. So I'm generally in favor of it. I'll just need to spend some time thinking on it.
Yep. I think since people already started work, do we know that about 7626? Are the engineers already working?
I don't think their engineering work has started, no.
Okay, cool. Well, we got to make sure that we're ready for that ASAP. So if we kind of, in general, agree about the concept, I would love to propose that the first action is 5BI, make a wireframe of that. Select the easiest possible policy and make a screen at the group level that shows some green and red stuff.
And for clarity, so if SOC 2 mandates that a customer has a code review policy, then we would show an artifact showing that, I think the example you provided previously was GitLab already has a merge request approver workflow or functionality, and using that as a basis for the wireframe.
Yeah, so project A and B, and then code review link to MR. So the first policy is that the code review happened. And what you see, if you go to that group page, you see you see projects and code reviews. You see project A and project B, and a link to the last merge request. That's it. That's how simple it is.
So I added a comment that Jeremy and I were collaborating on that maybe captures the intent. If you don't mind taking a look at that real quick.
Yeah, that looks to me, it's on the project level. So I think that's free, not one.
Right, so we would just bring that up to the group level, but that's kind of the visual intent maybe.
Yep. You just show the last one. You not have the security and the QA things, and not the job, and not the issue. All these things are great policies. Policy, everything should start with a feature request. Policy, everything should be security tested. Policy, everything should go to QA. Policy, the text should be green. Policy, like we can quickly whip up 50 policies. Let's start with the first one. So that is exactly that direction, Matt. And the only thing that's wrong with that is that that it's not iterative enough. It can be made much smaller.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Cool. If we're agreeing on that, who can make by when can we have a wireframe for that? Or a hand-drawn thing? Like it can always, I think I already made the wireframe, so I don't think it's that hard to make. I think you take this and you paste it in a thing that says you change the menu of GitLab a bit. So I think it's 5 minutes of work, but you know, I'm fine with it being an hour or two of work, but not asking for the world.
Matt, what do you think? Is this something maybe by end of week we can work on?
I mean, if based on the simplicity of what's here, I think it's maybe a tomorrow thing.
Cool. Now we can move on to the next one. Let's see. Entropy. So 4A, entropy is not character restrictions. Entropy is entropy. So measure the entropy instead. Character restrictions are they're out of date. Even the NIST doesn't believe in it anymore. So make sure that's reflected. Like if you want the obligatory XKCD comic, battery horse staple battery, or the other thing is a perfectly fine password. It contains a lot of entropy. If it wasn't already used by somebody else and in the hack passwords and everything else, but you get it. Like 4 random words is fine. So let's make sure we make that distinction and we measure with some JavaScript the entropy of the password. And we allow administrators to set that, but we don't allow them to say you need 5 special characters and stuff like that. That's behind the times. We should be leading people in the right direction. We should not do what our customers tell us to do. We should get them results. Personal access token. Yeah, resetting that on a periodic basis. That seems to me like as a user, that would be nightmarish. I have to keep resetting that every 30 days. It's easy to set for an admin. It's horrible on the user. NIST advises against periodically changing passwords. Now I recognize that this is not a password. I still think the same thing applies here. As long as there's no evidence, as long as it's not likely it's compromised, you should not reset it. So instead of this, why can't we make a big button that says, hey, personal access tokens were compromised, reset all of them right now? Because that's something useful. That's something that complies with NIST advice.
So the other thing I think I need to consider how we prioritize or which group can lead on this is just reducing the blast radius of PATs. In general, I think a lot of the anxiety for enterprises comes from the fact that there's an API scope token. Generally, there's like a bot user that has access to like lots of different projects and groups in their instance, and loss or that credential getting stolen is a large security risk. So I think that reducing the blast radius is also something we should consider prioritizing and looking into. I'll find the issues for that as well.
Yeah. So reduce scope is great. Allow for monitoring, like, and maybe even like if you start doing stuff you've never done before, we block you. Now it's impossible to make that perfect, but there's stuff you can do where like, wow, this thing hasn't been used in 90 days and now suddenly this is happening. So disable inactive ones that people forgot about. There's a lot of things we can do that is not just password reset policies that have just been proven not to work, and this feels like one. And I'm sure it's what the customers ask for, but make what the customer needs, not what they ask for. So those were my comments about the other things. And I hope maybe should emphasize, like, if you're really using personal access token, having to reset them every month is just a giant pain in the ass. And in the end, it doesn't do much for security, because if you get hacked, you get hacked, and people have that token and they can go out with it for a couple of weeks. Like, hacks happen over the course of days, not, they don't need a year of access to do damage. So it's much more about detecting, hey, what's vulnerable, what's no longer being used, let's shut it down, what is doing different stuff. Hey, we've actually been hacked, I want to reset all of them, give me an easy way to do that. That is much, much, much more valuable and much less painful to the user, because it's actually responding to a possible compromise. I'm a bit outspoken here because I'm trying to reflect the pain of users. I get a bit excited about that.
No, that's super helpful.
Cool. Cool. We can stop the live stream. And thanks for listening.